But the first thing I wanted to say was the very term ecopoetics, and most of you are probably familiar with it, but just the etymology, ecos, household, poesis, making. And so what this concept of ecopoetics is about is it is talking about the way our conceptions, our language, our inhabitants of art, poems, sentences, even our dream life, in fact, makes our household. It affects it. What we think and how we think it is consequential not only to ourselves, but to all being which we are connected to in our lives. And so that's sort of the basic framework that I have when I think about ecopoetics, is that it's some awareness of consequential inhabitants in our conceptual relationship to the world. So I can never understand anything in the present without thinking about the past. And when I think about, well, how did we get here? Mostly following the Western trajectory, I go back to the poem which, while it has many, many fabulous virtues, I think of in a way as our environmental original sin, which is the amazing and great epic Gilgamesh. And I'm not going to I don't want to take the time to review the whole story of Gilgamesh, but I will just say, any of you who aren't familiar with it, please read it. And if you have a faint memory, the parts I'm thinking of are when Enkidu and Gilgamesh first get sort of joined in their bond of amazing friendship. What do they decide to do? They decide to go into the primordial forest and cut down the tallest tree. So at the very headwaters of Western literature, you have a decision to take out the most amazing monument of nature and offend the god of the forest. Now, as a result of this, we get incredibly moving passages about the recognition of mortality, the description of the recognition of mortality when Enkidu is killed by Humbaba. It's beautiful, it's great, it's fabulous. But that's not the only original sin. The other original sin act in this amazing epic is at the end, Gilgamesh tries to become immortal. He blows it, as we all do. And what does he do at the end of the poem when he realizes that immortality has eluded him? He goes home and builds a big wall. So here you have, separation from nature. If I want to take a more compassionate view of this, I will say, well, of course, it was the beginning of the species. We were living in a world of wilderness, chaos, and terror. We needed to individuate ourselves as a species. That's my compassionate view of this. But it is still the separation of human world and other world, which is depicted in this. One of my theories, I have lots of theories that I can't defend, is that it is the role of art to lean counter, in part, to whatever mainstream conscious central awareness is. So if your central awareness is of wilderness, chaos, and terror, art will lean back and it will create the illusion that building a big wall is as good as being immortal. So there's the start of it. Now I would like to jump forward a mere 2,000 years, since that's 4 millennia ago, and say, let's drop in on Hesiod and then Virgil and see what's our relationship to the natural world by the time we get to the beginning of classical Western culture. And it's more one of appreciation, but caretaking. So I'm going to read you just a few lines from Virgil's beautiful Georgic on the bees. First find a protected place for the bees to live, safe from the winds that might blow them from home. And a little later, from the bright-backed lizards and all birds whose nature it is to devastate bees, catching them in their nests to carry them as cruel delicacies to their nestlings. Let there be clear springs close by. So he's actually teaching you how to be a good beekeeper. He's describing the natural world not as something to be terrified and separated from, but something to be cared for, an idea which has recurred more recently in Michael Pollan and Bill McKibben's books about maybe we have to treat the world as if we are its caretakers as human beings. Come forward again almost 2 millennia, you get to the Romantics at the very beginning of the Industrial Age, and you get Keats writing to autumn, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run. A deep affection, but if you read the whole poem, you will see there is a kind of unself-questioning human presence in the relationship to nature. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too. Believe me, it is a travesty for me to be talking about these poems in this very narrow way, but I'm trying to draw a kind of quick history of how do we write about nature. I'm going to take a side leap to 13th century Japan, which foreshadows, in a way, something that we start getting in the contemporary world, which is an irrational mixing up of the two consciousnesses. This is Dogen, Zen master, 13th century. Green mountains master walking, and eastern mountains master traveling on water. Don't slander by saying that a green mountain cannot walk and an eastern mountain cannot travel on water. All beings do not see mountains and rivers in the same way. Some beings see water as a jeweled ornament, but they do not see jeweled ornaments as water. What in the human realm corresponds to their water? We only see their jeweled ornaments as water. So you see, it's completely different. And this equality of realms and this self-awareness, I think, becomes a hallmark of what we have now come to call ecopoetics. That it's no longer innocent and unquestioning, that there's an awareness of beings see water in different ways depending on what point of view they're looking at it from. In our Western tradition, I think, certainly in our American tradition, which is what I know best, the great moment of self-awareness is Robinson Jeffers. In Carmel Point, his gorgeous lines, we must uncenter our minds from ourselves. We must unhumanize our views a little and become confident as the rock and ocean that we were made from. So that, for me, is the first moment when somebody is saying, maybe we can't look only from our human ego point of view. And after that, everything begins to break open. I think one can make a good case that the two most striking and transformative words of the 20th century were an image, Rachel Carson's title, Silent Spring, because a whole worldview and a whole transformation is in them. And once you have this awareness, everything changes. Everything begins to be different. As an example of one form of that difference, so I'm going to say something which my two compatriots up here can completely contradict. I'm going to say that I see, when we come to contemporary ecopoetics, 3 basic strategies. One is overt saying, subject matter, and that would be what you just heard in those lines of Jeffers, which again, it's criminal to take them out of their beautiful poem and just give them to you without the poem around them, but I don't want to go on forever. A second approach is a kind of onomatopoetic aesthetic of decentering. So a strategy of saying in which the dominant language of ego and object is dismantled, undermined, scrambled, shifted, enlivened. And there was a little bit of that in the Dogen. That's why I decided to read him to you. So it's a matter of a changed worldview inhabiting the very syntax, sounds, and structures of the saying. And the last of the three major strategies I see is a kind of presentation of a different way of seeing. So it's just given to you. It's not the explicit ideas, and it's not the disruption of surface. It's simply the enactment of equality, a democracy of being. And for that, I'm brought in. I'm only going to read you, I guess, one or two or three of them. And I'm not going to talk about my own poems, which was the last thing on the list. But there's a beautiful little series of Gary Snyder poems in his book, Danger on Peaks, called Dust in the Wind. And they're haibun, a form that was mentioned very briefly in the panel on the long poem as one of the strategies of mixing prose and poetry. And I just want to read you a couple of them, and you'll see the human world and the natural world are juxtaposed without choice. Each is simply seen and presented for what it is, two different ways of seeing. And if you read the whole series, he does it over and over and over again, and it just gets delicious. Spilling the wind. The faraway line of the freeway, faint murmur of motors, the slow, steady semis and darting little cars, two thin steel towers with faint lights high up blinking, and we turn on a raised dirt road between two flooded fallow rice fields. Wind brings more roar of cars. So that's the prose, and then below it in verse, hundreds of white-fronted geese from nowhere spill the wind from their wings, wobbling and side-slipping down. Give you a feel of it. This one's too long. One more. This is for his sister, describing her actual death in 2002, for Anthea Corinne Snyder Lowry. She was on the Marin County Grand Jury heading to a meeting south of Petaluma on the 101. The pickup ahead of her lost a grass mower off the back. She pulled onto the shoulder and walked right out into the lane to take it off. That had always been her way. Struck by a speedy car, an instant death. And then, white egret standing there, always standing there at the crossing on the Petaluma River. So I hope you can hear in this really brief, set of stepping stones, the evolution of a changed relationship of our human way of occupying, being in, fearing, trusting, caretaking, and describing nature in poems.